Montana Territory, May 1884. The wind tore down from the Bitterroot Mountains, sharp with snow still clinging to the high peaks, and by the time it reached the valley, it carried dust, pine, and something bitter. Loss. Lena Sutter stood in the doorway of her cabin gripping her 6-year-old son's hand, her face calm but tight as stretched hide. Her wide-brimmed hat shadowed her eyes, but her jaw was set. Across the yard, 2 men on horseback watched her like they were waiting for a dog to back down. "You have until sundown," the taller one said, adjusting the rifle on his saddle. "This land belongs to the Maddox cattle now. You can leave on your own, or we can help you off it. This land was deeded to my husband and now to me," Lena said. Her voice was steady, but Will's fingers clung tighter to hers. "We built this home ourselves." The shorter man laughed. "Your husband's dead, missus. You got no one to fight for you now." Lena didn't answer. She just turned and closed the door behind her. By nightfall, she had packed what she could into the wagon: blankets, her husband's old rifle, flour, salt, and the photograph of them on their wedding day. Will sat silent beside her, too small to understand all of it, but old enough to know their lives had changed. They rode east, away from the only home Will had ever known, the moon rising cold behind them. 3 days later, the wagon wheel cracked outside a half-burned barn near the Elk River. Lena was bone-tired, her hands blistered from the reins, her heart raw from pretending to be strong for her boy. "I can fix it," she muttered, mostly to herself, crawling under the axle. A pair of boots stopped beside her. "You need help." She rolled out fast, rifle in hand. Will scrambled behind her. The man held up his hands. "Easy. I am not with Maddox." He was lean, sun-browned, with a crooked nose that looked like it had been broken once. Dust covered his shirt and his voice was low, steady. "Name's Elias Evinger. I work cattle over at the McKay Ranch. Saw your wagon from the trail." Lena lowered the rifle but did not put it down. "We are fine." Elias looked at Will, then at the busted wheel. "No, you are not. I said we are fine." He nodded slowly, then crouched beside the wagon. "Will anyway. Let me help." "You do not owe me anything." Lena hesitated. Her pride was the only thing she had left, but Will's eyes were tired and the sun was already dropping. "Fine," she said, "but I do not want charity." "Would not dream of offering it," Elias replied. He worked with quiet focus, pulling a spare board from the barn and fitting it beneath the axle. Will watched him, curiosity slowly replacing fear. "You good with horses?" Elias asked the boy. Will nodded. "Maybe you can help me later." "Got a mare that throws her head every time I try to bridle her." Will lit up like someone had struck a match inside him. By the time the sun set, the wagon stood steady. Lena offered Elias a piece of cornbread from their dwindling supplies. He waved her off. "You and the boy need it more than I do." When he turned to leave, Lena asked, "Why did you help us?" He paused. "Because I know what it is like to lose everything." Then he tipped his hat and walked off into the trees. The next morning, Elias returned with a small sack of oats and a tin of coffee. "McKay will not miss it," he said. "Figure your boy could use breakfast." Lena narrowed her eyes. "You trying to fix us?" "No," Elias said. "But I can help you stand on your own again." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because you are not the kind of woman who should be run off her land." That night, Lena stared into the fire while Will slept curled up under a blanket. Elias sat across from her, hands rough and quiet in his lap. "You really think we can take that land back?" she asked. Elias leaned forward. "If you want it bad enough, I will help you fight for it." Lena's throat tightened. For the first time in days, hope bloomed in her chest like spring after a long winter. She nodded. "All right," she said. "Let us get my home back." The sound of a hammer striking would echoed across the clearing. Elias crouched beside the barn wall, driving nails into a fresh beam while Lena steadied it with both hands. The early summer sun filtered through the pine boughs overhead, casting long shadows across the half-repaired structure. Will sat nearby, polishing tack with a concentration too serious for his small face. You built this whole thing by hand? Elias asked, glancing up at the frame. My husband and I did, Lena said, brushing sawdust from her sleeve. He cut every board himself. I laid the shingles. Elias nodded once and went back to his work. The silence between them was easy now, filled with the scrape of tools and the occasional chirp of a magpie nearby. After a while, Lena leaned back against the wall and watched Elias measure the next plank with practiced ease. You fix things for a living? She asked. He paused, then straightened. Started out that way. My pa was a wheelwright down near Miles City. Taught me how to shape a spoke before I could ride a horse. What happened to him? Died of lung fever when I was 17. After that, I hired out to cattle outfits. Figured I'd follow the trail until something settled me. Lena studied his face. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet acceptance that reminded her of long winters and waiting for thaw. You ever want your own land? I used to think about it, Elias said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Never stuck long enough anywhere to make it happen. Will stood suddenly and brought over a cracked bridle. This piece is splitting, he said. We can't use it like this. Elias took it gently and examined the leather. You're right. Good eye. He looked at Lena. You mind if I borrow your stitching awl? I can patch this up before supper. Lena hesitated. Then she nodded and disappeared inside the cabin. Elias sat down on the edge of the wagon bed, threading sinew through the dull-pointed awl while Will watched every movement. The boys' questions came slowly at first about horses, wild colts, and whether Elias had ever seen a cougar up close. Elias answered each one with patience, not with stories meant to impress, but with the kind of grounded truth that made Will lean closer. Inside, Lena stirred beans over the stove, listening to the boys' laughter for the first time in weeks. That night, after Will had gone to sleep, Lena stepped outside. The stars were sharp above the treetops and the air had the coolness of snow still hidden in the high gullies. Elias sat near the fire, turning the patched bridle over in his hands. I can't pay you, she said quietly, settling onto the log across from him. I'm not asking for that. Then why stay? Elias looked toward the dark edge of the forest before answering. Because I haven't seen a place worth staying for in a long time. And this, it feels like something that could last. Lena didn't answer right away. The fire cracked between them, throwing light across Elias's worn boots and her clasped hands. I used to think strength meant not needing anyone, she said. But I'm starting to wonder if it's just knowing who you can trust to stand beside you. Elias met her eyes. If you want me here, I'll stay. I haven't decided yet, she said, but her voice held none of the steel it used to. He nodded once. Then I'll keep showing you who I am. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of pine smoke and distant water. Lena leaned back, listening to the night settle around them. For the first time since being driven off her land, she didn't feel adrift. Tomorrow would bring more work, more fence to mend, more plans to lay, but tonight she watched the firelight flicker on Elias's face and allowed herself to believe in the shape of something new. A week passed, quiet and full. The days stretched long under the Montana sky and the rhythm of work settled into something steady between them. Lena rose early, tying her hair back with a strip of calico and split kindling while Elias readied the horses. Will carried water from the stream without being asked now, his shoulders squaring a little more each day. On the 8th morning, Elias stood at the edge of the clearing with a map and a pencil stub in his hand. The paper was worn and creased, corners soft from folding. There's a ridge north of here, he said, not looking up. High ground, good view of the valley. If Maddox is running cattle through your old place, we'll see the trails from there. Lena stepped beside him, her fingers brushing against the edge of the map. You sure it's safe? No, Elias said. But it's necessary. She nodded once. Will can stay with Mrs. Halpern. She's got 2 girls about his age, and she owes me a favor. They rode out before noon, following a narrow cut through the trees. The air smelled of damp moss and wild sage. As they climbed, the trees thinned, giving way to stub grass and scattered rock. Elias led, his horse picking its way with care. Lena followed close behind, rifle slung across her back. They reached the ridge by late afternoon. Below, the valley unfurled in gold and green, the river a silver thread winding west. Smoke curled from the chimney of Maddox's bunkhouse in the distance, and fat cattle moved in slow clusters across Lena's old pasture. She sat down hard on a flat stone, jaw clenched. "That's my orchard," she said. "We planted those trees our second spring." He cut half of them down. Elias crouched beside her. He's not expecting trouble. No guards, no dogs. Just greed. That land was never his to take. "No," Elias said. "But he'll think twice once he sees you're not scared of him." Lena turned to look at him. "You think fear is what's kept me away?" He met her eyes. "No. I think you've been gathering the strength to come back on your own terms." She looked away, throat tight. "I want it back." "Then we'll take it," Elias said, standing. "Not with guns. With proof. You've got a deed. I know the county clerk in Red Lodge. He's slow but fair. We bring him witness that Maddox forced you out and he'll put it on record." "Who'd stand up to Maddox?" "I would," Elias said. "And so would Charlie Sims. He used to ride for Maddox before his brother got trampled in a stampede Maddox caused. He's got no love left for the man." Lena stared at the horizon. "If we do this, Maddox won't take it lying down." "No," Elias said. "But I'll be standing between him and you." They rode back under a sky streaked with dusk. The wind had shifted, cooler now, carrying the scent of pine pitch and river silt. Lena didn't speak, but every so often her eyes flicked toward Elias, as if measuring something new. When they reached the Halpern homestead, Will was sitting on the porch, trading marbles with a red-haired girl. He ran to Lena, arms around her waist before she could dismount. "I helped Splitwood," he said. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, brushing a hand through his hair. Elias tipped his hat to Mrs. Halpern, who stood in the doorway watching them with narrowed eyes. "He was no trouble," she said. "Boys got good manners." Lena turned to Elias once Will was settled in the wagon seat beside her. "We leave for Red Lodge in the morning. That clerk, he'll listen. He will if we bring the right words." "Then you'd better come with me," she said. "I don't plan to be talked over by men who think I'm nothing but a widow with no home." Elias's voice was quiet. "You're more than that, Lena." "Always were." She didn't answer, but her gaze lingered on him longer than it needed to. That night, as she tucked Will into his bedroll, he asked, "Is Elias going to stay with us?" "For a while," she said. "Good," he murmured, already drifting. She sat by the fire after he slept, Elias across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, even strokes. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It held something waiting, something warm. Lena didn't speak of what came next, not yet, but the way her hand rested near his on the ground said enough. The clerk's office in Red Lodge smelled of paper dust and oil ink, the windows streaked from spring rain that had passed through that morning. Lena stood straight-backed by the counter, a folded deed in her hand, her Sunday boots scuffed from the ride-in. Elias leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, watching the old man behind the desk with the stillness of someone gauging every breath. The clerk, a bald-headed fellow with spectacles slipping down his nose, adjusted them and looked again at the document. "This is clean," he muttered, scanning the lines. "Filed proper under your husband's name. Transferred to you by probate." Lena said nothing, only lifted her chin. "But Maddox," the man began, then trailed off under the weight of her stare. "He threatened me," she said. "Ran me off with a rifle in his hand and a man beside him who laughed when he did it." The clerk licked his lips. "Do you have anyone willing to speak to that?" Elias stepped forward, placing a folded paper on the desk. "Charlie Sims signed this. Says Maddox bragged about it at the saloon in Absorki. Said he'd cleared out a widow and taken the pasture for his own." The clerk's eyes flicked over the page. "Charlie's no saint. He don't need to be," Elias said. "He was there." Lena's hands stayed still at her sides. "You going to put it on record or not?" The clerk sighed, reached for a stamp, and pressed it down with a sharp thud. "It's recorded. You'll need the sheriff if you want to set foot on that land again." Outside, the wind rolled dry down Main Street, carrying the clatter of hooves and iron-shod wagon wheels. Lena stepped from the office and looked west. He won't let it go quiet, she said. No, Elias replied. But now you've got the law behind you. She faced him, the sun showing the faint silver in her braid. I never asked you why this fight? His brow furrowed, and his voice dropped low. Because I saw what it did to my mother when my father died. The way folks took what they could, figuring no one stopped them. Couldn't then, but I can now. Lena held his gaze for a long moment, her breath catching in a way she didn't let show. We ride back tomorrow, she said. They stayed that night in a boarding house at the edge of town. The woman who ran it gave Lena a cot in the attic and offered Elias a space in the stable loft. Will curled up beside Lena under a borrowed quilt, his thumb tracing patterns on the fabric. Are we going home? He whispered. She brushed his hair back, her voice quiet. We are. The next morning, they passed the edge of the timberline just after noon. The trail dipped toward the river, and Lena's land spread wide ahead, familiar and strange all at once. The orchard was mostly stumps now, but the outline of the house still stood, weathered and unchanged. They stopped where the fence had once been. A Maddox rider was on the porch chewing on a toothpick, boots up on the rail. Elias dismounted. We're here to reclaim this land. The man didn't move. You and what army? Lena rode forward, her voice calm. Me, my deed, and the law. The rider scoffed. Law don't matter out here. Elias stepped between them, close enough now that the man's hand stilled near his holster. You draw and you'll answer for it, Elias said. Sheriff's a day behind us with the writ. You want to explain this to him or ride off quiet? There was a beat of silence, then the man stood, dusted off his coat, and left without another word. Lena didn't watch him go, her eyes were fixed on the house. They worked in silence that evening. Elias repaired the steps while Lena swept out the hearth. Will chased frogs near the creek, his laughter rising and falling like wind through reeds. At dusk, Lena stood in the doorway and watched Elias hammer the last board into place. His shirt clung to his back, and a streak of dirt ran down his forearm. Suppose you'll be riding on now, she said. He didn't look up. That what you want? I don't know what I want, she said. But I know what I need. Someone who sees me as more than what I've lost. Elias set the hammer down. I don't see your loss, Lena. I see your fight. She stepped down the porch steps, slow, careful. He met her halfway. No words passed between them, only the space closing, then the warmth of her hand finding his. The sky above them darkened into stars, and the land, once taken, now held its breath around them. Lena bent over the garden bed, fingers deep in the dry soil, feeling the way it broke and sifted under her nails. The land hadn't been worked since the last frost, and weeds had crept in, bold and careless. She pulled them one by one, her breath even, her sleeves rolled past her elbows. Behind her, Elias hammered the last hinge into the new door. The sound was steady, not rushed, and when it stopped, she turned slightly to look at him. He stepped back, tested the swing of wood, then glanced over with a nod. You put that on straight, she said. I learned from a man who built coffins. Said the lid had to line up perfect. She wiped the back of her hand across her brow. That a comfort? Depends on where you're standing. She laughed, the sound short but real. Will came running from the creek path, his boots soaked and a fistful of wild onions in his hand. Mrs. Halpern said I could help her with milking tomorrow if it doesn't rain. Lena took the bunch from him, the bulbs still damp. You planning to earn your keep over there? He nodded, already distracted by the new door. Can I help oil it? Elias handed him a rag. Only if you take your time with it. Lena stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. She looked toward the edge of the orchard where the stumps had been cleared days before. A neighbor from 2 ridges over had come with a team of oxen and spent the better part of a morning dragging roots from the ground. She hadn't asked him, he'd just shown up, hat in hand, saying Elias had mentioned the job. When Will had gone inside to set the onions in the root cellar, Lena walked to Elias, her hand resting against the frame he'd built. You talk to folks when I'm not looking? I talk when it helps, he said. And what else have you set in motion without telling me? There's a man coming from Billings next week. Knows how to graft fruit trees. He's bringing saplings. She stared at him, unreadable for a moment. Then, you planning to stay long enough to see them take? I was hoping to stay long enough to plant them. She didn't answer right away. The wind passed through the pine just beyond the clearing, rustling the new leaves that had begun to unfurl. She looked at the corner of the cabin where her husband's initials were still carved. The mark faded but present. "You're not him," she said. "I know. But you're not trying to be." "No," she stepped close, her voice low. "I never thought I'd let someone in again. Not here. Not where everything carries memory. I don't want to take anything from you that you can't give. I've got less fear in me these days," she said. "And more room." He reached for her hand, and when she let him take it, she felt the callus of his palm. The way his thumb didn't rush across her skin, but settled like it had found its place. "You sure?" he asked, voice rough. "I am." He leaned in only when she did too, the kiss slow and quiet, like the land itself had paused to listen. That night, after Will had gone to sleep, Lena sat on the porch with a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Elias brought out 2 mugs of chicory, and they drank in silence for a while. The stars were thick above them, no moon to outshine them. "I've been offered a herd," he said. "McKay's retiring. Wants someone to take over." She looked over. "That what you want?" "I want to stay here. Build something that doesn't vanish when the season shifts." "You'd run cattle from here?" "Small. Enough for trade. Enough to keep us comfortable and Will learning honest work." She nodded slowly. "I've got plans for the North Field. Could plant beans this year, corn next. Sounds like the start of a good life." She reached for his hand again. "It is." By midsummer, the orchard had new trees in neat rows. Will could saddle a horse without help, and the fence line held against the wind. Lena wore her hair down more often, and Elias moved through the cabin like he'd always belonged there. He built a second room off the back with his own hands, and when it was done, Lena stood in the doorway and said, "This is where we'll sleep starting tonight." They married quiet under the cottonwoods by the creek, with Mrs. Halpern and her girls as witnesses. Will wore his best shirt, and Elias gave Lena a ring he'd carved from walnut, polished smooth with oil and time. There was no fanfare, just the sound of water passing over stone and 2 hands held steady. Years later, folks spoke of the Sutter place as a kind of anchor in the valley where fruit grew sweet and the fences stayed mended. Some said Elias had once been a drifter, that Lena had been hard as river stone. But those who knew better said theirs was a house built not just from timber and earth, but from forgiveness, from choosing again and again to stay close. And in the evenings after the work was done and the light turned gold through the trees, they still sat on the porch, her hand in his, not saying much at all, because everything worth knowing had already been lived.